Hello, and welcome back to the Inspiring Workplaces Summer Series in partnership with H&H, with 3 weeks of daily learning and inspiration for you, our global community. I'm Amy from Inspiring Workplaces, your host for today. As well as all content from Inspiring Workplaces, today's talk, along with all of the rest, will be available on demand in the stories section on our website shortly after we finish. So if you enjoy the talk, please make sure to share it with friends, colleagues, and anyone else you think might be interested. If you're joining us live, make sure you're joining in the conversation, add your comments or your questions in the comments section. So we've already heard some award-winning case studies from the top inspiring workplaces. And yesterday we had Rich Roberts share his 10 top tips for creating an inspiring workplace, as well as a really moving employee story. So if you missed it, that is definitely one to catch up on. On to today, I'm delighted to introduce Anne Rogers, Research Associate at H&H and founder of East River Insight. Today, Anne's going to be bringing us some hot off the press findings of the future of the workplace culture. Anne and the team at H&H have just completed in-depth research with 1,500 employees around the world, exploring a number of mythologies and theories that have built up around organizational culture. I've been told that some of the findings have come out of the research are quite provocative, maybe even a bit disruptive. So stay tuned to hear if the research changes the way you think about what makes a good culture. Welcome, Anne.
Thanks, Amy.
No problem. So I can't wait to hear what you're going to share with us today. I'll leave you to it and I'll be back at the end.
Thanks. So organizational culture, it's in our work at H&H, it's a topic that comes up over and over again. So organizations, companies will tell us about the way that they see their own culture. They may talk about it being a family-oriented culture, or they may talk about it being work hard, play hard. Sometimes we hear that it's a toxic culture and there's something that they want to look into and they want to address within that. But all of this got us thinking about, what does it all mean, really, organizational culture? If we spoke to employees, across the world and asked them what it means to them, what would they tell us? So we asked them. We spoke to 1,500 people, and they were across EMEA, Asia Pacific, and Americas. They were all employed by large companies, but within those large companies, they represented a wide range of sectors and industries, and we had a diverse mix of ages, genders, levels of seniority in there, so everyone from junior levels right the way through to senior management. And we asked them about organizational culture, what it means to them, how important it is to them, how do they feel about it? So the first thing to say is that it really matters to them. 70% of them across all three regions told us that organizational culture is something that matters to them and is something that they'd look into when considering a new employer. And particularly as people are moving through their careers, so those who were in senior management, 84% of them said that it was something they'd look into, compared with 55% in junior positions. Both of those are high figures, but you can see that it grows as people move through their careers. Overall, it's an important thing. And they also told us that they believe they understand it. So, we looked at this in a number of different ways. 76% of them said, I have a good understanding of what's meant by the term organizational culture, which was an important thing to check straight off. It can be one of those sort of buzzwords that people use, but don't necessarily understand. 77% said, I could easily describe my organization's culture. And correlating with that, 65% said, I believe that the way I describe my organization's culture would be the same as senior managers describe it. So there's a high level of, within them of belief that they understand organizational culture. They know what it's about. We did find inconsistencies, though. There are some areas where things didn't quite add up in the same way. So taking into account the fact that 70% have said, when I'm looking for a new role, it's something that's very important to me. It's something that I'm going to look into. We then found 47% said the culture that I've experienced is better than the description of the organization's culture. And 51% also showed some skepticism, really. They said, I don't see how managers expect me to be part of an organizational culture just by telling me what it is. Where actually, if you go back to that 70%, when you're interested in a new role, when you're looking at a new organization, that's all you've got to go on, really. You can only really go on them telling you what it is. So considering that there is that slight skepticism, and considering that 47% of people are saying it's better than they were told it was going to be, how much can we really read into the sort of party line description, the formal articulation of what an organization's culture is? So to look at that, we've gone back to basics. We're looking at what is culture. And depending on which definition you use, you might find slight fluctuation in this, but the overall consensus is that culture is the way of life of a particular group of people at a particular time, especially their ideas, customs, social behaviours and beliefs, which boils down to 3 key points. It's about people, time and beliefs. So if we take a look at those, we'll dig into those in a little bit more detail. But a key point also about just the term culture, the word culture, comes from the same root as cultivation, which is about growing things. And in science, if you look in a petri dish, a culture is a medium in which things grow. I mean, that's the whole point of it. So organizational culture has parallels with that. Its anchor is in creating an environment in which employees can flourish and learn, and most critically, where they can grow. And one of the biggest points we found in there was a sense from these 1,500 employees that we spoke to that culture doesn't come from the top of an organization. 58% of them across all 3 regions agreed that an organizational culture can't be inclusive if it's designed by just a few people. 66% told us that now more than ever, it should be up to employees to create a company's culture, not a few board directors. And 44% said people at the top of an organization have no idea about its real culture. So that traditional sense that says there's a figurehead at the top of an organization, or there are decisions made at board level that define the culture, and then everything feeds down from there, is really challenged by this. We've got a sizable proportion of people saying that's not how it works for us. That's not how it works in practice. It's just not about that. And their sense much more was that organizational culture is created by people, not for them. So the idea of culture as a collective power, they're not my words. I've borrowed them from the culture puzzle, which is referenced down there. But there's a strong sense within that as soon as a group of people come together in whatever context, whether it's professional, whether it's social, however they come together and they start to interact within an organization, that creates a culture. It's not that sense of top down. It's not bottom up. It's not about moving in any particular direction. It's that people coming together create a culture. And what is created by everyone and is owned by everyone. So looking at this a bit further, we took a look at the work of Robin Dunbar, he's a British anthropologist. He's currently head of department in the University of Oxford. And his studies were rooted in looking at non-human primates and how they form groups within them. So what are the factors that lead them to create groups, and how do the dynamics work within those groups that they form? And from what he learned, without going into lots of detail about the non-human primates, he then applied it to humans. He applied that learning to humans. And from that, concluded that, yes, as a species, as a human species, we seek community. But there is a limit to how far a community can grow before it loses its essential culture. There is a maximum size that a community can go to. And beyond that, smaller groups then break away, and they create their own cultures. They become a separate thing once we get beyond that overall size. And numerous studies have looked into this. And there's some debate about, you know, how precise you can be about this and whether there's a little bit of flexibility in this number. But overall, the consensus is that round about 150 is the maximum number of meaningful contacts that we as human beings can sustain. And they start from a very small group of our very closest contacts, our loved ones, be that a spouse, a partner, immediate family, around about 5 at that level. It extends to 15 when we include our good friends. So, you know, not just people that we know online through social media, but people that we really, really connect with, really relate to, people that we really trust and who are important. If we then add in looser friendships, that goes up to about 50. And by the time we get up to 150, that's where we've included anyone that we can consider a meaningful contact. So, you know, more than just sort of knowing someone by name, where you feel like there is a degree of relationship, that takes us up to around 150, give or take. And what we find within that 150 is that people may move from one level to another and back again. You know, they can flex like that. But when we get to a point where we want to bring new people into that community of 150, other people start to drop out. And we don't do this consciously. You know, it's not as if we've got, you know, Christmas card list on a spreadsheet and we're thinking I can only have 150, so I need to drop some out. But it just happens unconsciously, instinctively. As new people come in, some people will inevitably drop out. And we just naturally maintain this community of around about 150. So if you look at that within an organization, the chances are that within an organization, particularly if you have more than 150 people, it's not made up of a single culture. It's made up of multiple mini cultures. And part of the reason for that is if we come back to that idea that a culture is an environment that allows us to grow. And we know that the conditions that are needed for that are not the same for everyone. You know, there are multiple factors that make a difference to this. So, you know, our backgrounds and experience and neurodiversity, we're learning more and more all the time about how different people process information and how that makes them think and then behave and how they need other people to behave. Interests make a difference. And personality, even if we just look at sort of a core personality factor of introversion to extroversion, we know that there are sort of mixes there that don't allow people to work at their best. Me as an example, I'm 100% classic introvert. If you put me, I need space to think, I need time to think. If you put me in a team where everybody else is full on extrovert and they all thrive on really fast ideas and they love the stimulation of having people with them all the time, I'm not going to be at my best there. It's just not going to happen. Put me in the corner with the bookish ones and I'll be absolutely fine. And also me being in that extrovert group is probably not going to help them to be at their best. So all of these factors say there are different conditions that we each need to grow and to perform at our best. And we look those out, we find them, we find our own tribe, in short. And the thing is, traditional thinking on organizational culture says that we do things in the same way. You know, we all have the same kinds of behaviors and we act in the same way. And that's a good way to do things. The challenge to that is this idea of having a collection of mini cultures is just not a bad thing. It's not. If we go back to that idea of nature, a single species in nature is vulnerable, you know, to environmental change, that they're on their own with it, where actually a more diverse population within nature gives us strength. And so it's true also in organizational culture. And if we allow tribes to develop around how people work best, you know, allowing people to find those channels and those groups of commonality so they can work at their best, it can be a strength, not a weakness. So the analogy we've used here is the beehive. If you think about a honeycomb structure that you might find within a beehive, each of the cells within it is separate. You know, it's distinct from all of the others, but each one of them is dependent on all of the others to ensure the integrity of the whole structure. So that's the sense that we see within this, that each of these mini cultures is reliant on the others, and they work collaboratively. It's not a bad thing to allow people the space to work in their best way and find their own tribe. If we take this a little bit broader, and we look at consumer trends, it's something we see there too. One of the biggest and most enduring consumer trends that we see and that we hear talked about is personalization. We are looking for ways to express our individuality and to buy into products and services that express that individuality. Diversity as well. Diversity is a topic which now is talked about probably more than it ever has been. And a lot of that, yes, is about demographic factors. It's about racial diversity. It's about gender. It's about age. But it also applies to how we think and how we work and how we process information and how all of that fits together in a professional context. And so we can take these consumer trends and say, yes, this is more evidence to say we are seeking ways to express and to protect our individuality. And what we found in our research supports that. 56% of people across the 3 regions said that having a defined organizational culture suggests that we're all the same, that we all behave and work in the same way, in brackets, and we know we're not and we don't. 60% said, rather than a defined organizational culture, it's more important to celebrate the diversity of employees' personalities. So almost 2/3 are saying this, are saying, rather than having one way of working for all of us, it's more important to see that there are differences between us and to allow us to bring out those differences in people's personalities. So we talked about people, time, and belief as the 3 critical factors within culture. We've looked at people, time is another. And we also found from the research that we got back that a strong sense that people change over time, and so too should organizational culture. So 46% of those we spoke to said their own expectations had changed over time, but the organization, the culture of their organization hadn't. A sense that the organizational culture was playing catch up to the people within it. And 44% of people agreed that people at the top of the organization have no idea about its real culture. Maybe they did at one point. Maybe when their sort of formal definition of the culture was formed, they did have that sense of it. But 44% are saying now that they really don't. So from this, we have a sense that culture is something that evolves, that people evolve, that organizations evolve, and culture needs to evolve with them. It's not just about what we've agreed, what we've set down, and we've written it in the welcome pack. So that's what it is, isn't it? And if we look at different age groups, believe what you believe about generational differences. I will be honest, so much has been said over the last few years about generational differences. A lot of it I don't buy into, if I'm really honest. I think there's some huge generalizations in there, and I take it with quite a big pinch of salt. But when you look within the results that we found, if you look at people aged 25 to 34 in particular, there were a number of measures where they were significantly more likely to tell us, to pick out certain points for us. So for example, they were significantly more likely to say culture isn't inclusive if it's designed just by a few people, or that it's for employees to define, not for senior managers, or people at the top of an organization have no idea about its culture. Their own expectations have changed, but the organization hasn't. That a defined culture suggests we're all the same, and that it's more important to look at diversity of personalities. So, again, whatever you believe about generational differences, this suggests that looking at this particular group, aged 25 to 34, who are coming through, they are the senior leaders of the future. That's what they're growing into. They're telling us that they believe these things more strongly than other age groups do. Things move on. And again, a sense that culture, organizational culture, needs to move on too. So if we look at all of this, you could quite easily say, well, look, what are you saying then? Are you saying that organizational culture is not relevant? That it doesn't make sense to talk about it because there are all of these fragments, and because there are lots of ways that we could challenge it. And we'd argue that it does still make sense. We're not saying it's irrelevant. We're saying that the traditional sense of it needs to move on. So that sort of traditional idea of culture is defined by a figurehead or by a group of senior managers. They define it, they then pass it on to everyone else, and they expect that culture to thrive. Increasingly, we'd say that looks like nonsense. But what makes a lot more sense is the idea of organizational culture as a living, breathing organism, self-sustaining, and that is a crucial thing within an organization. But the people create it, the people of the organization create it, and it has its own sense of being. So we talked about people and we talked about time. The third factor in our three factors within culture is belief. So we come back to the idea of what culture is. It's that sense of belonging and finding a place in a community. And, as we've seen, we may not have the same ways of doing things. Our how may not be the same. But the one thing that we can coalesce around is a sense of a common belief in why we're there, why we're doing what we're doing, a shared belief in the vision, the values, the purpose of the organization. And that can be the factor that really unites much more than a sense of how we do things. So our belief is that belief in itself can be the link in the chain. It's that common ground that holds us together, no matter how different we are and how differently we go about things. And one thing that's been a challenge, most of us over the last couple of years have had our working lives changed, even if only temporarily, by the pandemic and by the conditions that's put on our working lives. We looked at the concept of working at home. Is there something about proximity that affects this? So, how does that affect organizational culture? Is it a disaster for organizational culture? Does it bring things together? Does it bring it to life? And when we asked people about that, we found an equal number of people in each group. So, again, there is a diversity of opinion on this. But we also found that people who were working in a hybrid manner, so partly at home and partly in the office, were more positive than other people in other working situations about their senior managers' group grasp on culture, their own understanding of their organization's culture, and also the sense that the two coincide, that they overlap, which gives us more of this sense that with shared beliefs and purpose, it doesn't matter where you are. You don't need to be in the office full time to buy into the organization's culture. You can feel connected and engaged wherever you are when you have that shared belief. So our so what on all of this comes back to that point. Our critical point in this is the focus on the idea that organizational culture is created by people, not for them. We would recommend don't just allow people to find their own culture. Actively encourage them to do that, and let culture move. Let it be flexible to survive and to flourish. It needs to be able to sort of ebb and flow and take its own direction. If there are fragments within that, see it as an opportunity, not as a risk. So coming back to the honeycomb, where each of the segments support the others, diversity gives us strength. Create employee tribes around common interests, so not just around functional skills. It's not just a matter of you all work in finance, so you're all similar in that way, aren't you? There will be common interest areas and common beliefs that can bring people together into their tribes. And invent opportunities for like-minded people to connect and link up, whether it's work or it's social. But look for and invent those opportunities. But don't force people into a single way of working. And also, don't reject people. Don't lose out on people who may be absolutely great for your organization because your impression at recruitment stage is they need a different environment to help them grow. So overall, our key point in all of this is to unite people around a purpose, because if people wholeheartedly believe in why they're there, the how is up to them. You can let them figure that bit out for themselves.
Wow, thanks so much, Anne. There's so much food for thought there. I was jotting some things down as you're speaking, and a few of the key takeaways for me were when it comes to defining a company culture, it can't be designed from the top. You need your people to be at the heart of its creation, and you also need to expect it to evolve as time goes on. Secondly, belief and belonging is at the heart of a good company culture, and can unite employees, even if they're different, and even in a dispersed workforce, which is super important given the climate that most people are in right now. But probably most interestingly to me is that culture has a size limit, and organizations are made up of mini cultures which support diversity and individuality. And that was kind of a bit of a eureka moment for me, because I think, well, firstly, it makes a lot of sense. But secondly, I think it's probably something that a lot of us have already experienced, but perhaps haven't really reflected on it until your presentation today. So a question to you is, have you seen in your experience this type of mini culture existing? And can you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
We've certainly found it. I think I guess one point on that, actually, just to touch on, is we have sometimes found that kind of difference in terms of the sort of different cultures and how people work, that comes through in a sense of people working in silos. And actually it can even go to the extent of sort of hostility or conflict between them. And in those sorts of situations, yes, I mean, there's a need to address that. It's if it manifests itself in that kind of way, there's a need to address it. But yes, we've certainly found it in a number of companies where actually we may have been presented with a situation where it seems as though people are incompatible to a degree in terms of the way they're working, but drilling down, it's often been through discussion with them and drilling into it that we found actually they have this shared belief. And when they're able to connect with each other and recognize that in each other and not just see the more superficial ways of working, that's where the whole thing really kind of comes together. That's where it creates that sense of strength. So it's not always upfront and recognizable. It might take a bit of digging to find it, but where it's there, that's where the strength is.
No, and I think that's quite relatable. I think actually quite often when you work in close groups and close teams, you kind of develop your own mini culture just within your circle of the people that you work the most of the time with. And I think also you spoke a little bit about introverts and extroverts during your talk. And I think naturally those kind of personality groups do group together because you need a slightly separate cultural difference. And I think naturally that often happens between teams because also the work that you do quite often fits whatever your personality style is. So I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it and looking at it as a positive rather than something that can create silos. So I think that would be something I'd love to explore a little bit more with you, but we would be going on and on forever if we kept talking about this. So one other question I had is, you mentioned that the research you did was across 3 continents. Did you find any interesting differences between what people were saying?
We did find some differences. If we look at the idea about it being important to recognise diversity in people's personalities, it came out as something that was important across all 3, but particularly in EMEA, actually, that was a difference that stood out there. And within Asia Pacific was really interesting in that it was more common there to find people saying, yes, it's really important to me. The idea of organizational culture is really important to me, and I understand it. They were also more likely than the other regions, though, to say, do you know what, we should just get on with work and not worry about this kind of thing. And I think that is probably just reflective of the diversity within that regional grouping of Asia Pacific. But beyond that, actually, there was a really high level of commonality. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest finding when you think about the degree of the sort of variation in social context in different parts of those 3 regions. I think that's probably one of the biggest findings, that in this work context, there was so much commonality across them.
Super, super interesting stuff. I think it would be great for us to kind of keep going on through this research. And if there's any more insights that people want to connect with you, Anne, I will send them in your direction. So if anyone has any questions in particular for Anne, please do email us at info@inspiring-workplaces.com and I'll connect you up. But for now, thank you so much, Anne, and I'll say bye from me. So we've still got more content to come next week. Gifty Enright is going to be sharing the 6 gender bias traps and how to navigate them in the workplace on Monday. So make sure to keep tuning in, same time, same place. But for me, Now, goodbye.